One. Hello, my name is Daniel Hodab, and we are the facilitators of the Law of One Europe Telegram group. And today we have another session with our amazing host, Gabriel Lugo. Hi, Gabriel.
Love every time you say that. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, everybody, for joining and sharing again this material with me, allowing me to read it and just share my thoughts on it, which I have quite a bit for this session. Um, Definitely, we're going to cover session 21 in one shot, I think, because there's not much I think we can linger on. So, yeah, in general, we're just going to continue the trend that we have, discovering more about the dynamics of um, the cycles, harvest. By the way, for the question that came up a little while ago about why do we have major cycles, believe it or not, thanks to a chat GPT interaction, I was able to get a little bit more of an understanding as to why do we have major cycles. So again, if anything, we'll just blame the artificial intelligence, GP, as I like to call it too. So we're going to start with the first question. I'm going to skip a couple of Andrija Puharik. I think that's how it's pronounced. Those are not too relevant, but the rest I'll cover. So let's just dive into it right away. And again, this is session 21. The first question is, even though they are related to contact, I do want to cover them because they're pretty interesting. And Don says, I have a couple of questions I don't want to forget to ask in this period. I'll ask them first. The first question is, would the future content of this book be affected in any way if the instrument reads the material we have already obtained? So, in essence, can Carla read the material and not affect the future information that's going to come through her? And Ross says, I believe, yes, at this point, it had been almost a month since they started channeling, and I suppose Carla had not read anything. So that's what Don is asking. So, is Carla's mind going to interfere with the content that keeps coming out? Ross says the future, as you measure in time-space communications, which we offer through this instrument, or rather, the future communications, which we offer through this instrument, have no connection with the instrument's mind complex. That's it. That's the answer. There is no intervention between or interference between Carla's mind and the information. That's what made the raw material special, still makes it special because, as far as I know, there is no other unconscious trends or channel material in this state. And I'll give some of my own interpretations as to what this means. Some of them, of course, based on a lot of things that we already know. But Ra continues and says, the reason why there is no connection between Carla's mind and the information is due to two things. First, the fidelity of the instrument in dedicating its will to the service of the infinite creator. So that's the first one. We know that Carla surrendered her will completely to do this, and she didn't care if she died on the where she was laying. I think it was bed, table, I don't know. Um, where she was. She didn't care. She just wanted to dedicate fully to this. Secondly, the distortion understanding of our social memory complex that the most efficient way to communicate material with as little distortion as possible, given the necessity of use of sound vibration complexes or language, is to remove the conscious mind complex from the spirit mind body complex. Well, that's a different one. I don't think I've ever seen that. Spirit mind body complex, so that we may communicate without reference to any instrument orientation. So, what best to communicate when there is no interference? um, when it's direct communication, simple. Because all channel material, there is the conscious mind present, and that kind of alters or filters through the information. And this wasn't the case. My musings on this is that so any information, any information is tinged by, let's call it densities. Yes. So information that comes from fourth density, it's tinged with its particular vibration. Yes. So whatever entity comes from fourth density, you will feel that sort of personality, right? That feeling of fourth density. Sixth density is one in which perception of the creation is one of unity, of total balance. Um, and that filters through, right? So the reason why we are all still in contact with Ra is because we all have access to all densities, right? Um, Awareness has access to everything. It depends, on how much you surrender your own awareness, just like Carla did completely, but her mind, body, spirit complex. How much you surrender your own will to the creator, then more of this information begins to shape your mind. Yes. I wouldn't call it contact at this point, but rather a an offering, right? That's what Ra says, offering of the self to the creator. That's meditation. That's meditation on silence, as they say. The key to the mind is silence. So before I go on a tangent here, because this is what gets me going, um, the in this case, it was the collection of information we called Ra, which belongs to the creator. It's not Ra's information. It's just the experience that that percept window of perception that we call Ra was able to communicate was for this pure, unadulterated, sixth density information. Um, if you guys want to talk about this or have any questions, like Daniel said, feel free to chime in whenever. But yeah, this is the way I see it. Now, an appendage to this, Don says, do you use your vocabulary or the instrument's vocabulary to communicate with us? So Ron says, we use the vocabulary of the language with which you are familiar. This is not instrument's vocabulary. However, this is not the instrument's vocabulary. However, this particular mind-body-spirit complex retains the use of a sufficiently large number of sound vibration complexes that the distinction is often without any importance. Carla was a librarian, so she had a pretty ample vocabulary. But Ra didn't use, let's say, her available words to speak. As they said in the question before, you see how they say that they they found that the most efficient way to communicate with as little distortion as possible, in spite of having to use language, right? That's what they say. Language kind of distorts things because it's an abstraction of reality. All language is a recipe. It's not the food. So sometimes we eat the recipe, or as Alan Watts used to say, the menu, not the food. So there is a sort of distortion there. And they do have, obviously, ways to formulate vocabulary as they know it. I think some of the words they use here, Carla didn't know them, I would think. So I'm skipping 3 and 4. It has to do with visiting of a friend of them. We'll move into question 5, which actually begins the information in this session regarding evolution and all that jazz that we have been dancing around. Don says, well, now we'll get back to the business at hand of doing the book. I want, as we covered this early part of the 75,000 year cycle, I would like to go back a little bit, quite some distance perhaps, before the 75,000 years occurred, and take one more look at the transfer of entities from Maldek to clear up this point. I would like to check the time that you gave us because we had some distortions in numbers back in the early part of this, and I'm afraid this might be distorted. These entities from Maldek were transferred how many years ago? Um, I'll throw in my disclaimer that this is not the type of information that I have been um, interested in to dive too deep. So my sharing here will be very shallow, as most of you should know that my biggest interest in the Law of One was the mystical teaching, the practical aspect of how do we live this, rather than history. And I believe this would be considered transient information, but maybe it's just my bias. So just wanted to throw that in there. However, we're going to cover that and just for fun. I think at some point this was fun for me, and I can still remember that. So Ross says the entities, oh, and by the way, we're talking about the third density cycle, which is 75,000 years. And in terms of the history within the Law of One, Ra mentions that the destruction of Maldek happened obviously before the 75,000 years. Why is this related? Because the population of Maldek, they had to reincarnate in planet Earth when third density started. So there's also some discrepancy in numbers that I I don't need to go into the details, but that's what they're trying to cover here. And now I think they're going to add a little bit more confusion because the years don't check precisely. I don't know. Go check if you want. I'm not going to do that. Um, so Ross says the entities of which you speak underwent several transitions. The first occurring 500,000 of your years, approximately in your past, as you measure time. At this time, the entities were transformed into a knot, K-N-O-T, knot. This continued for what you would call eons of your time. Those aiding them in those aiding them were repeatedly unable to reach them. At a period approximately 200,000 years in your past, as you measure time, a Confederation entity was able to begin to relax this knot from which none had escaped during planetary annihilation, destruction of the planet. These entities then were transformed again into the inner or time-space dimensions and underwent a lengthy process of healing. When this was accomplished, these entities were then able to determine the appropriate movement, shall we say, in order to set up conditions for alleviation of the consequences of their actions. At a time 46,000 of your years in your past, as you measure time, this being approximate, these entities chose incarnation within the planetary sphere. So the short of all of this is there is total annihilation of the planet, destruction. The consciousness or collective consciousness, which is really what wants to experience their density again, takes some time to gain enough coherence to be able to understand what it is that needs to be alleviated, healing. Then the choosing is to come into planet Earth to incarnate here so the experience can continue to evolve. And then from here, that's where they talk about 46,000 years. So in the second major cycle, that's what we're talking about. There's some more nuances added to this. Question 6, Don says, I see. Then no incarnation occurred before this master 75,000 year cycle of Maldek entities, correct? Ra says, this is correct in the sense of incarnation in third density time space. There is a suggestion, as a footnote, that says that Ra possibly meant here space time, and I kind of agree because incarnation in space time is what we're used to. Some of the discrepancies have to do with dates that they gave in session 10 in the first question. So if you want to go check that out, that's where you'll find it. So this didn't happen 75,000 years or before the third density cycle started here on Earth. Question 7 then says, were there any of these entities then incarnated in second density before the 75,000 year cycle? So were they in second density vehicles? And I think this also contrasts what they said in session 10, but I'm not sure. Ross says this is incorrect. These particular entities were incarnate in time space, third density, that is the so-called inner planes, undergoing the process of healing and approaching realization of their action. So there is still the process of sifting through the confused and baffled experience of dissolution of their planetary experience. So that was still happening. That's why they didn't even incarnate here in the first cycle, the first major cycle. Right? They had to wait for some reason until the second cycle. Don continues and says, I don't mean to be covering ground that we've already covered, but there are some points that we have trouble with fully understanding. And sometimes I have to ask the question a different way to fully understand it. So at the start of this 75,000 year cycle, we know that the quarantine was set up. I'm assuming then that the Guardians were aware of the infringements of free will that would occur if they didn't set this up at that time and therefore did it. Is this correct? Ross says, this is partially correct. The incorrectness is as follows. Those entities whose third density experience upon your red planet was brought to a close prematurely were aided genetically while being transferred to this third density. This, although done in a desire to aid, was seen as infringement upon free will. The light quarantine, which consists of the guardians or gardeners, as you may call them, which would have been in effect, thus was intensified. So again, we know that the quarantine was, which I don't fully understand. I never went into it in detail. But this quarantine was established by the first infringement on free will, which was the genetic modifications for the Martian population that came here before and started third density at the beginning. So that's that. I don't think there's much else in here. Question 9. Don says, now, when the 75,000 year cycle started, the lifespan was approximately 900 years average. What was the process and scheduling of mechanism, shall I say, of reincarnation at that time? And how did the time in between incarnations into third density physical apply to the growth of the mind-body-spirit complex? Now, here is actually a pretty good question that goes deeper into understanding the evolution of mind and spirit. It's pretty good. There's a lot of good information here, or things to ponder, I would say. Ross says, this query is more complex than most. We shall begin. The incarnation pattern of the beginning third density mind-body-spirit complex begins in darkness. For you may think or consider of your density as one of, as you may say, a sleep and a forgetting. This is the only plane of forgetting, third density. It is necessary for the third density entity to forget so that the mechanisms of confusion or free will may operate upon the newly individuated consciousness complex. First pause. There's a bunch of paragraphs here. Takeaway of this paragraph. Incarnating in third density is simply a veiling of the conscious mind and the unconscious. That's it. That veiling causes the darkness, the sleep, and the forgetting. What we forget is who we are, period. That's it. No more complication. We just forget who we are. So What are the philosophical questions that will arise? We'll even cover it here. It's beautiful. So let's begin with that. Incarnation in third density as a human requires, or it's just by default, a veiling of the conscious mind from the unconscious mind. And this is going to be important to even understand something that happened with Maldek or the Maldek population. So keep that in mind. But we're even talking about second density into third density, so the natural evolution, right? Ross going to continue and say, thus the beginning entity is one in all innocence oriented towards animalistic behavior, using other selves only as extensions of self for the preservation of the all self, which is the community, the group, the pack. The entity becomes slowly aware that it has needs, shall we say, that are not animalistic. That is, that are useless for survival. So this is the beginning evolutions of the primitive mind coming from animal behavior, okay, which we all have, obviously. You know, it's our prerequisite to have a vehicle, a body. So these needs include the need for companionship, the need for laughter, the need for beauty, the need to know the universe about it. These are the beginning needs. I want to emphasize that this is life. That's it. These are just the basic things that we want, that we need, and that everybody's looking for: companionship, laughter, appreciation of beauty. Um, so look at this. This is amazing. Companionship is relationship, right? That's how our self, let's not go too abstract here. Every human being is looking for love. Love is the natural relationship of self and other. That's it. So that's one of the needs. The second one is laughter. That is how the self behaves spontaneously. In other words, who we are naturally is joy. Any activity is joy, unless it's confused. And then we have questionable behaviors. The need for beauty. Beauty exemplifies perception. Perception is beauty. I'm talking about the natural awareness of things as they are. That's beauty. Beauty is not selectivity. It's just perception. And the need to know the universe about it. That is wisdom, truth, knowing, the path of knowledge. We have the path of knowledge here, the need to know the universe about it, the path of beauty, which is artistic perception, the path of companionship or love, devotion. These are the beginning needs. And this is just, you know why this happens? Because awareness is aware of itself. Period. That's third density. Third density is you are aware that you are aware. And that's how awareness relates to itself. That's how it sees itself, and that's how it knows itself. So they continue and say, as the incarnations begin to accumulate, further needs are discovered. So more development in the mind. The need to trade, the need to love, the need to be loved, the need to elevate animalistic behaviors to a more universal perspective. Oh man, I could go on a tangent here. This part, when they say the need to elevate animalistic behaviors to a more universal perspective, is how we deal with our emotions, is how we deal with our traumas, how we deal with everything else. Insert here everything that needs to be transcended, gone through alchemy, or whatever else you want to use. Anything that needs to go over the basic reactivity that we have towards situations, people, and ourselves. So that is how the mind continues to evolve. I won't go on a tangent, so I'll continue reading. Ross says, during the first portion of third density cycles, Incarnations are automatic and occur rapidly upon the cessation of energy complex of the physical vehicle. There is small need to review or to heal the experiences of the incarnation, as what you would call the energy centers begin to be activated to a higher extent. More of the content of experience during incarnation deals with the lessons of love. Thus, the time, as you may understand it, between incarnations is lengthened to give appropriate attention to the review and the healing of experiences of the previous incarnation. At some point in third density, the green ray energy center becomes activated, and at that point, incarnation ceases to be automatic. Before I move into that, I just want to give a quick analogy that comes to mind. To understand how the beginning incarnations are happening more faster, they're happening faster, as opposed to when the mind has developed more and more experience, then there is need for more time in time space to reorganize, plan, etc. So more time is spent between incarnations when the entity is evolving or the mind is evolving. Funny enough, when the body is also growing, and I can only speak from the perspective of building muscle, let's say. If you're training, by the way, those who don't know, I used to be a bodybuilder before, so that's why I'm throwing this analogy here. So what happens? Your nervous system at the beginning is what's being trained. When you lift weights, you can lift weights very often. The period of rest between days of training muscles becomes short. It's short at the beginning because your nervous system is not being that taxed. Just like the mind is not being super taxed when we are incarnating at the beginning. The more you train, the more you develop muscles and strength, then you tax your nervous system a lot. And instead of training every day, you have to train with more rest in between. Same thing that's happening here with incarnation. So the more something is developed, the more it needs to refresh and heal. Same word we use. Our muscles heal from when we train. So I don't know, random analogy there, but it checks perfectly. Mind and body. Question 10. Don says, oh, I didn't cover the green center being activated. This is because there is a conscious awareness of awareness. Let me explain that. An animal is aware, right? We can say that it's sentient, but it is not aware that it is aware. Come third density, the body, the mind, body, spirit now is aware that it is aware, but it is not conscious that it is aware that it is aware. So spirituality is the conscious realization that you are aware. And I like to put this when I describe it in my whiteboard, which I don't have anymore up. You are aware, but then at ness at the end, you are awareness. That's when you become conscious, consciously aware that you are aware. This is the point of green ray activation, at least for the positive path. So at that point, that conscious awareness of being aware is able to program its own incarnation. And I think this is what they cover in the next, no, not precisely. But in question 10, Don says, when incarnation ceases to become automatic, I am assuming that the entity can decide when he needs to reincarnate for the benefit of its own learning. Does he also select his parents? Ra says this is correct. Question 11, Don says, at this time in our cycle, near the end, what percentage of entities approximately incarnating are making their own choices? So green ray activation, right? Ross says the approximate percentage is 54%. Could be a little bit confusing to think like, well, 1981, 54%, more than half of the population had their heart activated and they are probably harvestable. That does not check with the numbers and the information that Ra gives. So my supposition here is that this 54% only applies to those entities who are aware, um, to the degree that they can make choices in time space, but haven't fully activated the heart. That's a different thing. They haven't achieved a 51% service to others, which takes more time. One thing is activating the heart, then the next step is dedicating that heart, devoting that heart. 50, more than half of your thoughts, your activities, everything should be congruent with this understanding. And that's my way of seeing it, by the way. Question 12, Don says, thank you. During this first 25,000 year cycle, was there any industrial development at all? Was there any machinery available during this period to the people? Ross says, using the term machine to the meaning which you ascribe, the answer is no. However, there were, shall we say, various implements of wood and rock which were used in order to obtain food and for use in aggression. Humans. It's a tool, it's a weapon. You can use it both ways. Um, so that was in the first 25,000 year cycle. Don says, at the end of this first 25,000 year cycle, then, was there any physical change that occurred rapidly, like that which occurs at a 75,000 year cycle? Or is this just an indexing time for a harvesting period? Ra says, there was no change except that which, according to intelligent energy, or what you may term physical evolution, suited physical complexes to their environment. This being of the color of the skin due to the area of the sphere upon which entities lived, the gradual growth of peoples due to improve intake of foodstuffs. So stronger bodies and more adapted to the environment. I think I'll throw in here the question that came before, and I have a better answer now, which is why do we have this 25,000 year cycles and a harvest at the end if entities can leave whenever they want after they have activated indigo ray? Well, it seems like harvest is for all of those entities, like I just um, alluded before, that are consciously doing work towards evolution, but they haven't even activated 51%, right? They're not harvestable. Those who reach harvest conditions, then they can be harvested at the end because they're not consciously fully aware, right? There's still a major attachment to Earth, to third density. So they need third density and they continue to reincarnate in third density. However, those conditions, which again, this is just my current understanding, those who are able to leave at any point during any cycle, right, to fourth density or whatever they want to go, is those who have activated fully indigo ray. And so from indigo ray, there is free will of choosing what they want to do, right? So there is a self-realization happening at this point rather than the working towards being more loving and understanding. So there's a difference. There's a nuance there. It has to do with um, full self-realization. We can call it that. So that's what makes the difference. Question 14, I think is where we're at. Yes, Don says, then we have a condition where at the end of the first 25,000 year period, I would say, I'm guessing that the Guardians discovered that there was no harvest of either positive or negatively oriented entities. Tell me then what happened. What action was taken? Ross says there was no action taken except to remain aware of the possibility of a calling for help or understanding among the entities of this density. The Confederation is concerned with the preservation of the conditions conducive to learning. This, for the most part, revolves about the primal distortion of free will. Um, Very short way to see this is that I think they mentioned this actually, and this is a repetition of last session when they said they gave the analogy of the gardener waits for spring, to for seeds to sprout, right? It doesn't do anything in the beginning stages. If the seeds don't sprout, then they act, they do something. And that's what the Confederation would do. Here, the same thing. The other understanding that can be extrapolated from this is that we want to wait until things kind of move in the way that it wants to move. And then we'll see. That is free will. Just let's see how they behave. Let's see what they develop. We don't want to get involved. By the way, if you do this with your mind, you'll see something beautiful happen. You know, take away that I thought that is around there, trying to control, trying to push away, trying to select things that it wants. Take away that. Just let the mind run on its own. You'll be surprised of what you see. Question 15. Don says, then the Confederation gardeners did nothing, I'm assuming, until some of the plants in their garden, shall I say, call them for help. Is this correct? Ross says, this is correct. Then Don says, when did the first call occur? How did it occur? Ross says, the first calling was approximately 46,000 of your years ago. This calling was those of Maldek. These entities were aware of their need for rectifying the consequences of their action and were in some confusion in an incarnate state as to the circumstances of their incarnation. Check this out. We talked about veiling in third density. The circumstances of their incarnation was that the unconscious being aware, the conscious being quite confused. I'll explain this. This created a calling. The Confederation sent love and light to those entities. So let's go back to the Maldek mind. The Maldek mind, or the Maldekian mind, had a memory of what happened. That's buried in the unconscious. Incarnating in third density means veiling the unconscious mind. But the conscious mind feels, senses the unconscious mind, but it doesn't understand it unless it goes inwardly. So they felt pretty disturbed. Their conscious mind was very disturbed. This is what created the calling. It's a disturbance that calls for what's going on. See? So at that point, there is a conscious calling, and that's what it is. That's how the Confederation was able to assist. And that was the first calling. And it happened precisely when they incarnated here on planet Earth 46,000 years ago. So that makes a lot of sense. I hope that made sense for you. Questions, if they should come up. Question 17. Don says, how did the Confederation send this love and light? Precisely what did they do? Ross says, there dwell within the Confederation planetary entities who, from their planetary spheres, do nothing but send love and light as pure streamings to those who call. This is not in the form of conceptual thought, but of pure and undifferentiated love. Beautiful. It's not conceptual thought. It's not channeling information, but rather just pure, undifferentiated love. Don says, did the first distortion of the law of one require then that equal time, shall I say, be given to the self-service oriented group, so the negative group, the Orion group in this case. Right? Did Orion also have an opportunity to do this? And here's the thing, let me just read all of this and then we'll talk about it. Ross says, in this case, this was not necessary for some of your time due to the orientation of the entities. Don says, what was their orientation? Ross says, the orientation of these entities was such that the aid of the Confederation was not perceived. Curious, right? And Don says, since it was not perceived, it was not necessary to balance this. Is that correct? Ross says, this is correct. What is necessary to balance is opportunity. When there is ignorance, there is no opportunity. When there exists a potential, then each opportunity shall be balanced. This balancing caused by not only the positive and negative orientations of those offering aid, but also the orientation of those requesting aid. So even though the Maldekians called for help, if it's just a desire for clarification, for understanding what's happening, right? There's not necessarily a call for a specific path. So that's why even the Confederation's aid was not perceived. So there's no need to balance anything because no positive information was able to go through, but rather just the environment, was created for them to make up their minds, to understand, to maybe go deeper. But yeah, that's why it may sound a little confusing that even the Confederation was not perceived, and so they don't say Orion Group here, but it's self-service oriented, and they talk about Orion now, but I hope that makes sense also. Question 21, Don says, I see. I want to clear up a point here. Then, when was the first contact by the Orion Group in years? And we covered this already in the last session. Ross says, as we have said, the Orion Group attempt contact approximately 60,000 of your years in the past as you measure time. Nazca lines, the Eastern Island heads, and all that stuff. Don says, I'm sorry, I meant the first attempt in the second major cycle. I am now working in the second 25,000 years. How many years ago was the Orion Group's attempt in that cycle? Ross says the Orion Group next attempt in more fertile territory, approximately 3600, 3600. Finally, they got it right, 3,600 years ago in the past. So no contact from the Orion Group in the second major cycle. Don says, in other words, there was no attempt 46,000 years ago by the Orion Group. Is that correct? Ross says, this is correct. Question 24, Don asks, as we progress into the second 25,000 year cycle, at this time, during this period, was this the period of Lemuria? Ross says, this is incorrect. However, those who escaped the destruction of Lemuria by natural catastrophe and were thus of Lemurian background continued their learned teachings at locations ranging from your South America onward through the Americas, as you know them, and continuing over what was at that time a bridge which no longer exists, the Bering Strait. There were those in what you call Russia. Next question, Don says, just to quickly refresh my mind, how many years ago did Lemuria suffer its catastrophe? And Ross says this was approximately 50,000 of your years ago. The origins being approximately 53,000 of your years ago. The damage being completed in the last small cycle of the first master cycle. So Don gets clarification. Did you mean to say master or major cycle? The appropriate sound vibration complex is major cycle, says Ra. So yeah, 50,000 years ago is when it finally collapsed or suffered its major catastrophe. Question 27. Don says, thank you. Then, did the ending of this major cycle have something to do with the destruction of Lemuria, or did this destruction just happen to occur at the end of that cycle? Ra says there is a confluence of energies at the ending of a major cycle. This encouraged what was already an inevitable adjustment in the movement of the surfaces of your planetary sphere. So we have one more question. So I can go back to one of the things that are recorded as 25,000 year cycles. We know this as the Great Year. So many civilizations, I think all civilizations figure out this wobble of the Earth that takes about 25 to 26,000 years to happen. And this is called the Great Year, at least in one way of calling it. But this is a real thing that happens, and those are all the eras of the zodiac sign, like how the sun comes out in different. The way I understand it, I'm no astrologer here, so forgive my neophyte approach to this, but this is a very well-known phenomenon. And it seems that every 25,000 years, some traditions speak of changes that happen not only in consciousness, but also in the physical. So mind and body are affected. And this might have contributed to something that was already happening with the plate tectonics, continents, shifting movement of the earth, and so on. So that's another thing that we can draw a parallel between physical changes and mental, spiritual changes and harvest. So I don't know much more about that, but that's another thing that I remember, God, 6 years ago. I was interested in all of this, and that's as far as I got. So last question for today, question 28, the end of session 21. Don says, thank you very much. I apologize for being so stupid in making my questions, but this has cleared up the point nicely for me. Thank you. Then, in the second 25,000 year major cycle, was there any great civilization that developed? Ross says, in the sense of greatness of technology, there were no great societies during this cycle. There was some advancement among those of Deneb, who had chosen to incarnate as a body in what you would call China. So Deneb is a star. I don't know how many lights year. It's not too far. And if memory serves, those of Deneb were second density, where the planet was not ready for third density, and so they decided to come here. Maybe that happened at that time, second major cycle. Then they say, none of these became what you would name great, as the greatness of Lemuria or Atlantis is known to you due to the formation of strong social complexes and, in the case of Atlantis, very great technological understandings. What am I missing here? No, nothing. They continue and say, however, in the South American area of your planetary sphere, as you know it, there grew to be a great vibratory distortion towards love. These entities were harvestable at the end of the second major cycle without ever having formed strong social or technological complexes. This is the last question they say, and so on. So I don't know what this means because we're talking about second major cycle, which they said it was only like 150 entities that were harvested to fourth density. That's part of the material at some points. I don't know if we talked about that already. Maybe we did. But they're talking about a great civilization in South America, right? And these entities were harvestable at the end of the second major cycle. So is that where the 150 entities came from? Was that maybe? I guess I'm thinking that should be more than 150, but I don't know. It's just one of those things that make you wonder when you read the material. But that's it. That's question, or rather session 21, and hope you enjoyed it. I did.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Was a session with a lot of information about cycles and planets. And do you, as a participant, if anyone have a question, feel free to ask or raise your hand first. Otherwise, I will ask my question. Do you have any idea or any information why this circle is 25,000 years? There's any information from other sources and not
For
100,000 years?
what?
Why the circle is 25,000 years and not 100,000 years, for example? Yeah. Because it's mentioned in so many, as you said, I think in the Mayan information, as it also mentioned that one circle is about 25, 20, 26,000 years, and then there's a change. Do you have any information from other sources why the circle is 25,000 years and not anything else?
None other than that the Earth's um, spinning has a very, um, very slow wobble, and that's what causes the 25,000 years, or at least that's how we measure it. I'm sure there are metaphysical reasons as to why there is this wobble, and how does that align with cosmic forces and all of this? That I don't understand, but that's as far as I know that what causes, and for civilizations to have realized this, because, well, we were astrologers, we loved looking at the stars, so we saw this, and yeah, some information might have filtered through to explain, what happens at the end of every cycle, because we know that if there is a year, especially in the north, we experience cycles, right? We experience different seasons and so on. So we kind of see, the same things repeating. So, the Hindus had the yugas, and they were pretty nuanced in terms of consciousness. They were all about consciousness and how, it rises and it falls. The Mayans, I don't know what they had, but similar things. So to me, that's the way I weave it together. That's how I tie them all up. But yeah, there's a reference in the sky, then there is, uh, figuring out like what does this mean, in terms of the planet and the people. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have some hands up here. First one was Joe. Joe, you may like to ask your question.
You. Thank you, Gabriel. Yeah, I'm a bit confused about the line between space-time and time-space. Which one are we in? Are we in time-space or space-time?
Well, you are beyond time, space, and space time. But now, mystical side, or actually, that's the truth. You are not in any of them. Space-time and time-space are within you. But I know your question. I just needed to say that. Um, so time-space refers to, let's just call it mind, right? And space-time refers to physicality. That's the easiest way to remember. You see?
Space-time is physicality. Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're in a linear, but Ra are not. That's correct, isn't it?
I don't believe that's true, actually. Everything existing in time and space, however you want to flip it, it's a linear process. There is an available, let's say, an experience that we can validate about simultaneity that is not linear, of course, and that is awareness. Awareness has no time, awareness has no space, and everybody is aware. So if we explore ourselves as awareness, then we are We're seeing ourselves beyond time and space. But yes, the experience of being a separate being, a limited, finite mind, must have a time and a space because things need to move sequentially and they also need a place to be. So that's why we have this conception of space and time, but its nature is awareness. I don't know if that helps.
No. Only because I'm a bit sick on these things. Because I can remember Ra saying at one point that they were in one space, but they were able to choose which time they were in.
So are we. So do you remember when you were the house you were living when you were 12 years
Yeah, but
old?
I can't actually visit that. I can remember it, but I cannot recreate it. I cannot. I got the impression from Ra that they could, but actually the whole point of my question, to be honest, was because you said that when when these entities died, they needed time to formulate the process of the next incarnation and or possibly heal. So they must still be in this linear process, or we must still be in the linear process when we die. So I was wondering at what point you're not in that process. At what point, yeah, that's it. Well, at what point are we not in this linear process?
The thing is that you have to define when you say you or
Yeah,
we,
yeah.
what are you referring to? Because what you refer to, how you define the self that is um, being investigated, because you're investigating what happens to the self. So you need to define that first. What do you mean when you say we or I?
Well, I'm talking about my consciousness.
Okay.
And at the moment, my consciousness, my awareness is confined within this physical body.
Can you consider the other way around, that your physical body and your consciousness is confined within you? How would that change your perspective?
I'm confused. That's how it changes. Say that again. How would I?
So, yes, because you're defining the self as being contained within a body and a particular mind,
Mhm.
right? So if we flip it around, and instead of the body and the mind containing yourself contains body and mind. So it doesn't need them. It's using them, or they're useful for experience rather.
But we're not able to do anything about it. So
Who who
we
is the
can't.
we?
We I am not able to do anything about it. I I can't. Uh, I can't get out of that feeling of being contained within the body. I know a lot of people, are able to travel out of body and do all sorts of weird and wonderful things, but this self can't. And so I find it difficult to um, imagine, or imagine the self containing the mind and body.
Yeah.
Even if I understand that that's possible, I can't I can't visualize it.
So let's do an exercise, Joe. Let's just investigate this together.
Am I being really thick here? Am I?
No, you're answering you're asking the right questions, and I I want to be able to show you this so you can check in your experience. When you say I, what do you mean in experience? What does I refer to in your experience?
I am an awareness. I am a consciousness. I am, yes, that's how I feel I is.
Mhm.
I have a personality as well.
Okay, that's what I has, but not what I is. So let's just concentrate on what I is in direct experience to you. Does it have any qualities? Or do qualities appear and disappear?
Yeah, they appear and disappear.
Perfect. So I is not dependent, whatever I means or is not dependent on phenomenal experience, thoughts, mind, or physical sensations. So we can see, you see how you can, we have reverted through our direct experience, we have reverted the idea that I am contained within a body and a mind. No, body and mind is contained within what I call self or I. And it's a direct experience. It's nothing abstract or metaphysical here. Yes?
Okay. Yes.
It's such a simple and basic foundational understanding that we skip it, we kind of ignore it. But this is it. This is the great understanding. This is the great awakening. This is the great realization. What you will see is that your mind has been conditioned and has been rehearsing this identity with body and mind so much that our reactivity to the world and to ourselves is through this so-called entity that we call me and my personality. So I'll make it even more appealing to you and say something else that this has nothing to do with leaving the body. You never leave a body. You always need a body. When people have astral projections and dreams and travels and all of this, there's always a body. They're still confined in time, space, in a body and a mind. But who we truly are is never confined to anything but itself. God.
But when we die, we're then not confined to time, space, because we don't have a body.
Yes. So here's the thing. When you say, when I die, who are you talking about? Who
I said
dies?
when we, but yeah, well, okay, so when the body dies and we have no body, when I die, when I am not in my body anymore and don't have a body and I'm thinking about the next one to go into, then I am not confined and I can't be in time space.
So let's keep correcting the I here, but it's going to be very helpful. Again, it does. So
Right.
you have already acknowledged and admitted that I is independent from mind and body. So what we perceive as death is simply the cessation of a particular experience.
Mm.
And that's why we associate meditation with death. It's the surrendering of everything, right? The nothingness. And yet I remain. The same feeling of I is just bereft of experience, phenomenal experience. So what would be the difference in death of the physical body other than the cessation of a particular experience, which in a nuanced philosophy like this one, we can call it space-time. your question is more, and correct me if I'm wrong, is what is the experience of no physical body, which is the experience of the mind. And I would argue that it's no different than your thoughts right now. If you live in your thoughts, you are confined to one space and three dimensions of time, right? That's what we call time space.
Mhm.
It's only one space. The body there is just static, and there are three dimensions of time. And I'm going even more than I really like to, but what's the experience? That's the experience. So obviously, the mind that has been crystallized to a certain um, degree would like to experience again the fun of space-time, and it moves back and forth. What's the point? Evolution. What's the evolution towards? Sifting through experience until it's no
Mm.
longer needed.
Which is kind of what I thought, but then I don't understand then why there needs to be time for people to heal, or for for entities, whatever, for us to reincarnate.
That's a good question. And I think my limited answer would be that um, a primitive mind that hasn't, because remember, the mind remains, the mind continues as inertia. Okay. Um, because the body is not there doesn't mean that the mind is gone. The mind continues. This mind, depending on the complexity of it, would need more time, or, yeah, time as we perceive it, let's put it that way. Time as we perceive it would be lengthier, right? Because we're measuring time here in planet Earth. So it'll be lengthier for this mind to rearrange itself in a way that is capable of coherently be able to sustain itself in space-time. What a verbiage. Um,
No, I think I get what you're saying now.
yes,
Effectively, you're saying that even when we die, our mind doesn't die. Even when our body dies, our mind doesn't die.
that's correct.
Well, I didn't know that. Oh, I'm glad I'm keeping my mind. Mm.
Mind
Okay,
never dies.
right. Well, I didn't know that. I appreciate that consciousness doesn't die. Now I'm going to have another question, but I'll save it for another day and let somebody else talk. Thank
I'm
you.
loving this, so please keep bringing them. Thank you,
Okay,
Joe.
I'll save it for next time.
Thank you, Joe and Gabriel. I love to follow your conversation. It was good. Also helpful for me, for my understanding. I think I'm not sure any had the hand up in between. If you still want to ask the question, feel free to unmute your microphone. If not, it's also fine. Okay, then we had. I have seen the hand up from Josh. If you still want to ask, or you was.
Yeah, that was great to listen to. I appreciate everything you were sharing, everybody. I had originally raised my hand just to say the 25,000 year cycle. In science, they call it precession of the equinoxes. If you Google that, it'll explain. I think it said 26,000 years, but explains just why the Earth has this cycle, but it's neither here nor there, just a artifact of the tangible 3D thing. But it says that they're often cited as the beginning of the new zodiac age, like the age of Aquarius, is corresponds with the next when it makes a full circle. But anyways, I'm more curious about that conversation you were having, and I think Joe, one way I understand this may not fit perfectly with what other people's understandings, but my simple answer is we are in space time. We can move in space, but not in time. Time space is the inverse, is where you are in dreams when after you die, before you're born, you're in time space. Ra talks about it like kind of like you're in a library and you have a book in front of you, and the book is your whole life experience, and you can rifle through it and check out any page. I like to think of it as looking at a video on your phone or on YouTube. You could grab it and fast forward and rewind. You can go forward and back in time and see, the whole outplaying of your life, just like moving through a video, on YouTube or your phone. But you're not in physicality. You're not in the material dimension of space. You are able to move throughout time and view things, but you're not down here with people on Earth who are born, who can walk down the street. And when you leave your chemical yellow ray body that we're inhabiting at the moment, our meat suit, your spirit, I believe Ross said you go to you're automatically in your indigo ray body when you die and you're doing your life review. I think they had mentioned that. So, and yes, the consciousness that you are, the mind, as some may call that, never dies. It is all that there is the large I, right? Is the self. However, the way I think most people think of their mind, it has a lot built into it with your personality, your ego, your biases. That goes with the body. The big I that you are, that doesn't die when the body dies, is not your everyday mind, that was fully formed by this life's experiences, but rather it's the infinite version of you, the eternal, version of you that's had hundreds of lifetimes. So in a sense, it's a combination of all of those minds from all those lifetimes, but distilled into a larger, more continuous version. So I'm just saying, I think when you die, eventually there is a period, from listening to NDEs, right? Some people say they don't even know that they're dead, right? They're just like, oh, who's that guy lying in the bed? Oh, crap, that's me. At least for some time, you are the same. But I think eventually you'll shift, and a lot of your, like your limited third density humanness will fall away. Because think about it, you could have had lives on different planets and different species and different, you could have been a dolphin or an octopus or, some alien thing. So the human is just the mind that you are now is just from one incarnation. But when you die, the true you, the higher self, is not limited to the human on Earth in Europe, in the UK. Sorry for rambling, just sharing my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Josh. Gabriel, you like to comment something on it? Or
Yeah, no, thank you, Josh, for that. A lot of coherent views on this. I think the only thing which is just, you know, building upon what Josh shared is to don't feel so distant from what time space is. I think it's my speculation that this happens a lot because we are overly emphasizing the experience of the body, very much attached to the body. The I is attached to the body. So the mind seems like mysterious. It seems very strange. If anything, this just calls for know your mind more. So the mind is time space. It's not an astral projection that is time space. It's not death that is time space. It's not, your mind is time space. And it shouldn't be a foreign landscape. And to know that in the same way that we, like Josh said, we can move back and forth on a video on YouTube, aren't we do this with our minds all the time? So, and again, it's we can fall into the same idea of identifying too much with the mind, and I think this happens when there is too much association with mental activity. Those are the images, by the way, that Josh says that we reinforce, the ego, the separate self. That image gets reinforced so much, and that's what we live through in ignorance. And that's what falls away. That's what dies, really. And it doesn't really die. It's like shadows don't die. Shadows just get illuminated. So yeah, it's another invitation for me to understand. I think Ra talks about this as they don't say landscape. Do they say topography? Something like that, the topography of the mind. So learning a lot more about it.
thank you very much, Gabriel. We have two more hands up. I think it will be the last for today. I would like to ask you, if possible, to keep it short. We start with Lucas.
Yeah, first of all, thank you all for your questions and answers. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I just had a thought and a question that I wanted to add. Because you were talking about space-time and time-space, and I think Ra or Kuo also said that we can see it as like space-time is the visible and time-space is the invisible, to keep it like really simple, or like the physical and the metaphysical. And yeah, and that would me bring or would bring us like right back to your example you gave, Gabriel, with remembering a experience. And if I was thinking, if time space is anything that is invisible, it would mean like any image that comes up in my head or in my mind would be in time space. And so if I remember like any experience I ever had, that basically or literally is or I am literally in time space in the moment I'm seeing that image. And yeah, but and then I have a short question, because then I was thinking, okay, if space time would I saw it a bit like, I think that's from like physics, a bit where space seems to be, or space time seems to be like where the space is like confined or fixed in a way, where everything around us moves like in a certain way, and it's not like the table suddenly starts flying, And if we are in time space, I was thinking that maybe time is confined or fixed in a way, meaning that if I'm remembering a experience, time is not linear there, and I can like move through this experience. I can go to the future. I can go to the past, but space is and space is more linear there. But yeah, I'm not quite sure. And I was also thinking, if we're experiencing like space-time locally, if like higher density entities would also have like their own kind of space-time. But yeah, right.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure of what the particular question was, Lucas. So
Yeah, mainly I was asking myself if like higher densities do experience like space time in a sense, because
okay.
I was thinking that they would have a kind of body, and and I was thinking because like the body seems to me to be physical in a sense, not only chemical, but like the indigo body is also physical, I think. And that's what I thought, or what my question is.
Yeah, beautiful question, actually. The answer is yes, for common sense reasons, and also by information. If you go by what Kuo or other channel material in LNL research has shared, they explain the same thing, that there are space-time and time-space in all densities. There is not one density that doesn't have these two. So the answer is yes. What varies, of course, is the type of experience that, as I alluded during the session, the type of experience that awareness has. I have a penchant for reminding all the time that it's just one single being that is having the experience. The perception of being an entity is an inevitable aspect of awareness being infinite to be able to perceive itself. In other words, awareness needs a perceivable body, a place to be. And for it to experience things, it needs a sort of line, which we call time, for things to appear and disappear. Time is the way we measure things happening. Space is the way awareness, and when I say we, I refer to awareness, experiences things, allegedly or apparently solid. So any entity, any possible entity that can exist, I don't care if we now develop a model of 144 densities or one single density or whatever it is, any entity must experience time and space, at least in the way that we understand it. There is just, and it just makes total sense. That which is infinite can only experience the infinite unless it becomes finite. When it becomes finite, then it must be localized in space. And for things to happen, there needs to be a line which we call time. But space and time don't really exist in that way. They're just the inevitable ingredients for experience to happen. So yes, all entities uh, must have, at least from the understanding that we have within, if you want to go by the law of one, within this octave.
Thank you. That really made sense, I think. Yeah, because like, why would it be different to our experience? It's just more broad, probably. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
One
you.
last thing, Daniel. I hope you don't mind. because this is really good information. Am I okay with getting away with a little bit more before going to Grace?
Yes, we have one final question from or comment from Grace.
I just want to add this really quick. Again, the perception of time-space should not be confined to a specific experience. Time-space is the mind. The mind does have a potential to have a vast amount of experiences, and that's what we call uh, meditation, astral projection, anything. It's just because in the current state that the mind is, in the conscious waking state, it's very limited. And so we have an access to the mind very limited because there is a vast, vivid experience in space-time or physicality. So I'm adding this just to show that it is a sort of uh, constriction in the mind to have this experience. But anything that is in the mind, even if you remember the thought coffee, that is time space. It's not physical. All the way to having an mystical experience, it's still time space. There's nothing greater or smaller. It's the same time space.
I like that explanation. Thank you very much. One final comment question from Grace. Grace, go ahead.
Hi guys. I'm not often able to join you with the timing. I'm on my way to drop off some food for a client, but I hopped on and what a beautiful discussion. I really appreciate all of the thoughts and perspectives. I just wanted to kind of pose one question. Because I was really reflecting on the I statement, and when you were asking Gabriel, when you were asking Joe, like, who is I, and identifying with the human shell that we are, I started thinking about how Ross speaks of disciplining the personality. And when Ross speaks of that, which aspect are they speaking to? Are they speaking to our human personality, or are they speaking to more of the spiritual essence that we are and we come in as? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Good question.
All right, Daniel, we need another half hour for this.
I don't
Yeah,
have any
Grace
appointments today.
Grace just hit the heart of seeking. So yeah, and beautifully phrased too. Does it mean our personality or a, I'm going to say greater personality? This actually, this question, it can go in so many ways, but let's examine what the disciplines of the personality are. It starts with the foundational step, which is know yourself. Knowing yourself in any spiritual tradition refers to I, pure awareness. The question that I presented to Joe, what do you mean when you say I? What does I refer to? Does it mean a particular bias, attitude, an image that we have of ourselves, or does it refer to this pure awareness that where everything is contained? So knowing yourself is the mystical question. Classic. Who are you? Then the disciplines of personality, according to Ra, which I take in two ways. Accept yourself. The first thing that needs to be accepted is who you truly are. This is the correction that needs to happen at the level of the mind. We don't need to correct it at the level of, interaction. That's why the I thought is very helpful for conventional conversations or interaction. The I thought is the default mode network in the brain is basically evolved for that, for communication, for treating with each other and so on, relating. So the correction needs to happen within, and that's the accepting of who you are. But then there is a second part of the process, which is generally called healing, and is accepting that which comes through. And that which comes through, funny enough, we tend to separate into qualities that we don't like about ourselves and qualities that we like. Both need to be accepted as balance. This is the balancing work. So the disciplines of the personality are now saying, accept that which comes through. This is healing. And it so happens that when you accept, this is shadow work, by the way, all these words that we use for this, I tend to forget so many are used for the same process, but it's just one single acceptance. And truly, our shadow self is just that which has been suppressed by prior information that said unwanted, not good, unacceptable. Now, when this is allowed to evolve, which Ra says, moving these animalistic experiences to the top, to universal understanding, then something develops, which is our service, our particular service to the world. That is the creator or becoming the creator. So the disciplines of the personality is really, in a nutshell, stop getting in your own way. Be who you are. Stop suppressing those things that you love doing, because that is your service, that is your contribution, that is who you are. You are the creator. So again, two aspects of this. Who you truly are is not even a creator. It is pure awareness. The creator is that which the creator does, or the doing, which two things you can see. There is pure awareness, and then there is the experience of this awareness as a manifested being, which is, we could call that a personality, if you will, but there is no way to identify with that because now you're creating an image, and you can create an image of God. God is always changing in its form, manifested form, if that makes sense. Does that help?
Yeah, really beautiful. It makes me think of the words of Rudolf Steiner where he says like we're ennobling our preferences, and it really brings out like that idea of authenticity and your service. So I really appreciate that.
And I'll add to, just to finalize this, that this requires no effort on our part. What seems like an effort here to allow ourselves to be is just the renouncing, the surrendering. That's what feels like an effort. Surrendering those things that do not serve us anymore. And it feels like it hurts. It doesn't hurt. It hurts to the ego, yes, but not to the self. So yeah, there's not much to do, just allow.
Wow, what a beautiful session today. I think we cannot do much better closing words, but I still will ask you to say some few words to closing that session for us, Gary.
Don't complicate it. If the mind is complicating it, it's because it's curious and it just wants to know, and that's fine. But we have been complicating things for too long, and all we need to do is relax and enjoy every single day, every single moment, and do not categorize experiences as better or worse. There's no such thing as or at least I try to confine everything within time space as the mind. That's it. Or put it as a single experience. That's what divinity is. That's what this moment is. This moment is divine simply because it is. We don't overcomplicate it. So, yeah, sit back and enjoy life.
Thank you very much, Gary. They are very good closing words. And I think we have set today a new benchmark of quality of the study group. So I was really amazing session. Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you.